Hi, this is David Unsworth, English editor of the PanAm Post. Well, the moment that the political world has been waiting for months has now arrived. Today, Hillary Rodham Clinton released her memoir, What Happened, in which she outlines her tragically failed 2016 presidential run in which she snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. In typical Hillary Clinton fashion, I want to be somewhat charitable to her, but it does seem to be a recurring trait with Hillary. She set out to suggest that she was going to take the blame for what happened, but just a casual perusal of the themes of her book seems to point to exactly the opposite. The blame game here is Hillary Clinton blaming everyone else she can possibly think of, nationally, internationally, in her own party, in the Republican Party, even in third parties. She does direct a little bit of the blame towards herself, but much, much more. The lion's share is directed towards other people. So we are going to work our way through the book over the next 15 or 20 minutes and take a look at her diagnosis of her campaign and probably what will go down in history as perhaps the most shocking electoral result in American politics in 100 years. So, to begin with, Bernie Sanders. Obviously, Bernie Sanders, she was expecting something of a coronation, not a nomination in the Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders changed all that. He was nothing but a blip on the radar screen in 2015, and all of a sudden in 2016, the Democratic base, especially younger voters, coastal voters and so forth, were enamored of him. He's a Democratic socialist, not even a Democrat. He's an independent senator from the state of Vermont. I've actually been following his political career for decades. I remember him in the early 90s when he represented Vermont as the sole member of the House of Representatives from Vermont. Well, Bernie, what Clinton said here, quote, "It was beyond frustrating that Bernie acted as if he had a monopoly on political purity." He also quote-unquote, had to resort to innuendo in impugning my character. Fair enough, but really, Bernie Sanders actually gave her a huge pass when he said that, we'll just let those quote-unquote damn emails, we'll leave those on the side, we're sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails. Bernie Sanders may still be kicking himself for the rest of his life over that. I mean, it was a serious criminal matter, and many people do feel that it should have been the subject of a criminal investigation. Next up on the list, Bernie Bros. Bernie Bros were largely college-age or young working professionals, very plugged into the social media, often working in fields like tech, based out of Silicon Valley and so forth. And Hillary targets the Bernie Bros for attacking her supporters online with attacks that were, quote, ugly and more than a little sexist. Next up on the list, Jill Stein of the Green Party, who peeled off votes in critical swing states like Ralph Nader did. And then again, though, she doesn't bring up the issue of the Libertarian Party, which almost certainly took votes away from Trump. And you have other parties like the Constitution Party. I mean, all in all, this is basically a wash. The Libertarian Party typically takes more votes away from the Republicans. The Green Party takes more votes away from the Democrats. But Jill Stein or whoever the Green Party runs is not to blame for Hillary Clinton's loss. I mean, where for example, I've said this dozens of times to people. Her key strategists in Florida were saying to her, look, Hillary, there are some issues here. We're not doing well with the Cuban community. Colombians and Venezuelans, they may not be turning out in the numbers that we had hoped for. You need to invest in some Spanish language radio ads down here. We need to follow the strategy that Barack Obama followed to win Florida twice and win it with quite an impressive Latino turnout. But Hillary Clinton just ignored them. She didn't invest the time and resources there that her in the Latino community, which would have been pivotal, and she lost the state of Florida by about 110,000 votes, if I'm not mistaken. In Wisconsin, I mean, a state, she didn't even go there. She did not visit the state since the Democratic primary. She did not go to Wisconsin. I mean, Hillary Clinton largely has her own arrogance and incompetence to blame for the loss. Yes, clearly there were some other factors. One of my favorite political commentators, Jake Tapper at CNN, on election night I was watching his coverage, and he said, well, in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin, my friends tell me we have a lot of leaners. And his co-hosts, Dana Bash and so forth, well, what are leaners? And Jake Tapper says, well, they kind of survey the room, kind of like look at you, wink, and lean into you and say, you know what, I'm actually thinking about voting for Trump. And it's entirely true. The media, academia, the cultural elites and so forth, social media, even big business, even Wall Street interests, they made it very socially unpopular and painful to be a public and out supporter of Donald Trump. So that was really the key variable in why these pollsters had it so wrong, why people like Nate Silver just completely blew it. Back to Hillary Clinton's blame game, sexism and misogyny, which led to the victory of a flagrantly sexist candidate. On this point, I have to give Hillary a little credit. I mean, Donald Trump, he really put his foot in his mouth a bunch of times. I mean, I do not think that sexism and misogyny is the reason that Hillary Clinton lost, but, Trump is, it's kind of sometimes like watching a train wreck. I mean, you want to watch because it's fascinating. You want to watch because you can't believe it's happening. You want to watch because it's exciting, but there's also an incredible element of danger to it. I mean, Trump is kind of cruising for a bruising often, and a lot of the things that he says actually just kind of end up backfiring, and they impede his legislative agenda. Next up on the list, of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian hackers. Again, that is not the reason that Donald Trump is president. That is not the reason at all. The sum total, all that Vladimir Putin did was tell the truth. He told the truth about the DNC's collusion with the Hillary Clinton campaign to thwart the campaign of Bernie Sanders, which is who the party activists really wanted, and especially the party activists under 40. This guy, Bernie Sanders, is a democratic socialist, which should be frightening enough to anyone who believes in free markets, the rule of law, capitalism, democracy. And the Wall Street interests were just as terrified of Bernie Sanders as the power brokers, the kingmakers, if you will, at the DNC. So it's not at all surprising that the politically powerful and the economically powerful are going to get together and thwart the campaign of an insurgent candidate like Bernie Sanders. And a message to all my Bernie Sanders supporting friends: no, Bernie would not have beat Trump. He wouldn't have even come close. He would have gotten trounced. There's just not a chance. I mean, the guy is a democratic socialist, for God's sake. Now we're really going off the deep end with her criticism. Hillary Clinton blames Barack Obama for not playing up, not using the gravitas, the prestige of his office to publicly announce on television that we were under siege from Vladimir Putin and from Russia and from Russian hackers and so forth. I mean, come on. Barack Obama did more than anything. I mean, more than anyone. I mean, Barack Obama, as crazy as I think it is, and as much as I don't agree with him, he was wildly popular for 8 years. Even with independents, with young people, with various racial and ethnic minority groups on college campuses, he was extremely popular. For Hillary Clinton to blame President Barack Obama, I mean, that is just nuts. That is just absolutely nuts. And add to that Joe Biden. She also blames Joe Biden for, quote unquote, saying that the Democratic Party did not talk about what it always stood for after campaigning for her. It's just crazy. Joe Biden made a perfectly reasonable observation that Hillary Clinton was not connecting with working class voters. When was the last time you walked by a pickup truck with a Hillary Clinton bumper sticker on it? If your answer to that is never, which it probably is, then ask yourself why. Hillary Clinton, organized labor normally turns out in droves for Democrats. They are one of the key political players in winning elections for the Democrats. And Donald Trump basically split the union votes with Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's astounding. You can't win a national election as a Democrat if you're splitting the union vote, you're splitting organized labor with the Republican candidate. That is just crazy. FBI Director James Comey. The thing is, she blames Comey. It was her own fault for setting up her own private server. It was completely her own fault. And she blames him for reopening the investigation and so forth. Well, she might not have even been the candidate if Comey had actually, as many people feel like he should, charged her with a criminal offense for what she did. It was breaking the law, and documents have been uncovered recently that reveal that the FBI has now been saying that, a lack of public interest in the case led us to decide that filing charges were not appropriate. Lack of public interest? I was certainly interested. A lot of my friends were interested. A lot of people I know. If she broke the law, she should have been charged for it. I mean, no one ever thought that she was actually going to jail. I mean, that's just crazy. She should have been charged for this and plea bargain it out and should have dropped out of the race and let a real candidate, someone who does not have all the ethical baggage of the Clinton family, to run. Anthony Weiner. Of course. Anthony Weiner here in the New York Daily News. It's Huma Abedin is alleged to have stated, "This man is going to be the death of me." Anthony Weiner, who in his 2013 New York City mayoral campaign, it actually emerged that he was still carrying on various inappropriate Twitter relationships and sending out inappropriate photos of himself. Reasonable enough. I mean, there is no question that Anthony Weiner, on that point, Hillary Clinton really hits home. Anthony Weiner, it could not have come at a worse time, and Anthony Weiner is probably about the most hated man in the Democratic Party these days. Clinton brings up her statement about putting coal miners out of business. Well, look at the state she lost. West Virginia, we all knew that was West Virginia is just custom made for Trump. We all knew that Trump was going to take that. Pennsylvania, Ohio, well, that's coal country. Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Kentucky. I mean, she has a reasonable point. There are serious environmental problems with coal. No doubt about that. But by her own admission, pretty dumb thing to say, just taking on the coal industry and saying we're going to put them out of business. And how many times do we hear Trump use that on the trail, or his supporters hold up, have their mining helmets on with a sign "Trump digs coal." This is my personal favorite of all the various reasons for her loss. The basket of deplorables moment. It really, even though at that point in the election I still didn't think Trump had a chance, it really did just become a rallying cry, because the same way that Trump really, put his foot in his mouth when he said Mexicans are rapists and criminals and so forth, when you dismiss half of Donald Trump's supporters as deplorables, I mean, not just misguided or really foolhardy, or they've got some problems. Deplorable is a pretty strong statement. And, I mean, the honest fact of the matter, there are a few people in the Trump camp who are racist, who are sexist, who are homophobic. There are some Republicans. There are also some Democrats. I mean, it is not racism, sexism, and misogyny that put Trump into the White House. Did they play a factor? I'm not going to deny that, but it was really it was about the worst thing she could have said. You're writing off half of an entire political party as racist, sexist, homophobic, and people that should be placed into this basket of deplorables. She does take some responsibility for her use of a private email server as Secretary of State. Fair enough. Of course she's got to do that. And the emails and so forth. Next up, though, she blames the New York Times for affecting, quote-unquote, affecting the outcome of the election by their coverage of the email scandal. Well, they have to write about it. It's the paper of record of the United States, really. I mean, that and the Washington Post. What were they going to do? I mean, just sweep it under the rug? This was a huge deal. We had the nation's leading presidential candidate facing potential criminal charges. I mean, did she seriously expect that the New York Times was just going to say? Not to mention that, I mean, the New York Times, yes, they haven't always been just best buddies with the Clinton family, but their political bias is pretty clear. You'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not acknowledge that they have a considerable bias towards the left wing, towards the Democratic Party. I mean, for her to blame the New York Times, the New York Times, all they've done now for the past 6-7 months, the New York Times journalists wake up in the morning, what can we do to impeach Trump? That is pretty much the job description of a New York Times journalist today. Next up, she blames her own traditional presidential campaign, which was based on, quote, carefully thought out policies and painstakingly built coalitions that could not compete with Trump's reality TV show that expertly and relentlessly stoked Americans' anger and resentment. I mean, her painstakingly built coalitions, I mean, we all know who are the typical supporters of the Democratic Party. You've got organized labor, you've got the teachers' unions, you've got academia, you have scientists, you have African Americans, Latinos largely, about 70% usually go Dems, women's groups, and obviously, the Democratic Party is an urban party, right? The Republican Party is a rural party and a suburban party. The Democratic Party is largely an urban coastal party, especially the Pacific, the West Coast, and the Northeast. I mean, what is she talking about here? Carefully thought out policies and painstakingly built coalitions? I mean, her carefully thought out policies were whatever she thought was going to be popular. That's what people couldn't stand. People thought, whether you're on the left or the right, you're a libertarian, you're a socialist, you're a moderate, whatever, everyone thought that Hillary Clinton didn't have a political opinion of her own that had not been poll tested and focus group tested, and she was a vessel that wanted to be whatever the American people wanted her to be, And that's why you had Bernie Sanders on the left and Trump on the right coming in, and Trump mixing things up with his full frontal assault on political correctness, and Bernie Sanders mixing things up with his full frontal assault on capitalism. Next up on the list of Hillary Clinton's blame game, the quote-unquote God-forsaken Electoral College. Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million. Well, this has been the case. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it's now 5 times that one candidate has won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College. We would need to change the Constitution in order to do anything with this. That's really what we need to do. And do we have the political will to do that? I certainly don't think so. I don't think the founders and the framers made it prohibitively difficult to change the Constitution. And yes, I understand the arguments for just electing a president with a popular vote, but we are not going to be changing or eliminating the Electoral College. It's just not going to happen. Next up on the blame game, herself for not realizing how quickly the ground was shifting under our feet, quote, in the national mood. Well, fair enough, but like we talked about, Wisconsin and Florida, don't listen to your top advisors in the Latino community, and don't even visit the state of Wisconsin. I mean, her own arrogance and incompetence are largely to blame here. I mean, she can blame everyone under the sun, Sanders, Biden, Obama, racism, sexism, misogyny. She ran a terrible campaign. There's no doubt about that. And to conclude, Hillary hate. Here's Hillary Clinton on Hillary hate. Quote, I've come to terms with the fact that a lot of people, millions and millions of people, decided they just didn't like me. What makes me such a lightning rod for fury? I'm really asking. I'm at a loss. The first thing that comes to mind would probably be that Hillary Clinton is she is just a fake, a phony, a fraud. She's someone who, I mean, she's not a religious fanatic. She's not a socialist. She's not a communist. What are her real political views? She's probably just a moderate Democrat, something akin to center left, but she bends over backwards to be all things to all people, and that is the main problem with Hillary Clinton, and it is why, when someone like Bernie Sanders came along for the first time, people really gravitated to him. People were really excited about his candidacy. Hillary doesn't understand why people don't like her, and it makes her sad, and it makes her confused, and she is at a loss as to her ability to understand this. Well, there is a key thing here that Trump has, that Sanders has, that Clinton does not have: authenticity. So until Hillary Clinton figures out how to appear to the American public to be authentic, she's going to have a serious problem. This has been David Unsworth with the PanAm podcast discussing Hillary Clinton's recently published book entitled What Happened? The Memoir of Her Failed 2016 Presidential Campaign.